We're going to be talking about MCP and ChatGPT apps. So a little bit different. We're going back outside for more external use cases of MCP. And I wanted to talk a little bit about how we can design and build ChatGPT and MCP apps with a modern developer experience. All good. So just a quick intro. I'm Erica. I'm one of the co-founders of Alpic. That didn't move as I wanted it to. No, there's just a little bit of latency. Sorry about that. And we are we have built an all-in-one cloud platform for MCP, purpose-built for MCP. So we help companies expose their products and services to AI agents and LLMs via MCP. We help throughout that entire development lifecycle. So on the build portion, where we have open source frameworks and do consultancy services. And then we help companies deploy, monitor, and distribute their ChatGPT and MCP apps as well via our hosting platform. So before we begin, I just wanted to get maybe a show of hands. How many people have heard of ChatGPT apps? Okay, a little over half, more than half. How many use ChatGPT or MCP apps? Fewer. And how many have built a ChatGPT or MCP app? I know a couple of you. Okay, cool. Yes. Given that not everyone is really familiar with this is really brand new. So basically, everything I'm going to talk about tonight is built on the MCP protocol. And as you well know, MCP has gone from basically an Anthropic pet project about a year ago to a fully fledged open standard in the Linux Foundation that supports very many complex use cases and has started to be used very widely. And one of the most recent additions to that is the possibility of adding UI into MCP and being able to render UI as part of the things that a tool can return. So OpenAI released its Apps SDK in October of 2025, and this essentially brought a lot of possibility for brands, allowing brands to basically become part of the chat experience, not just mentioned in kind of a GEO sense, but to actually build an application that is part of the chat experience. And this is one of the apps that we actually built for Voyage Privé, or where we can actually see the person interacting and chatting with an app. So this opened up a lot of possibility for brands. First, on the distribution side, we gain access to almost 1 billion users on ChatGPT per week, plus everyone else now on Claude and the different IDs. Control over the customer journey and the image. So we're bringing back branding into ChatGPT. It's not just a text interface and a ChatGPT branding. We can actually bring your brand back inside, and your visual identity. We can have more rich user journeys and more things that we can do acting on the brand. And we also have the concept of zero-step discovery, where you can simply invoke, you can say, booking.com, find me a hotel for tonight in New York, and actually just invoke the app after connecting it to ChatGPT. So if you haven't yet, I encourage you to go and use the apps in ChatGPT. And all of this with all of the benefits and the perks of the ChatGPT of the MCP protocol. So we have all of the OAuth, where users can actually sign in and access their information. We can do personalized experiences. We have the structured reasoning behind the tools, resources, and prompts available in MCP to guide the model. And we can actually get some insight into what users actually want to do and their intent by understanding what tools are being invoked and what widgets and UI are being interacted with. So after our first wave of apps were released in October with that announcement, the actual app submission opened to the public in December 2025. We have over 100 apps on the App Store now. The releases are around weekly for the time being. And what we're seeing with our customers, at least, is it's about a 1 month review process. To be honest, it's quite manual still, and I think OpenAI is very much, interested in having quality apps and making sure that everything works correctly and having a good user experience. These are all across different types of services. So from productivity to retail to travel, we're talking B2B, B2C, et cetera, et cetera. And again, I'm talking a lot about ChatGPT, but this is also available in Claude today and in several other MCP clients. So what did we do? We got busy building apps. We've built dozens of them now, many of which are already live on the App Store, especially in the travel space. And in doing so, we encountered certain design patterns, certain constraints, and certain things that we decided to distill into the SkyBridge framework, which is our full stack open source framework for building MCP and ChatGPT apps, which I will talk about a little bit later. But first, I wanted to give you a little bit of, why SkyBridge exists, and go a little bit under the hood about some of the challenges and opportunities that this kind of new paradigm actually gives us. When we're bringing UI into MCP, we're talking about a new stack. We're talking about so the UI in and of itself is packaged within MCP. This is part of the MCP protocol. Widgets are exposed as MCP resources, resources being a primitive of MCP that existed long before UI, so there wasn't actually anything added there. And the way that we coordinate with them is via metadata and a URI pointing towards a resource, which we'll get into a little bit later. And then, so that's on the MCP server portion. And then we have the host runtime API, which gives us different forms of interacting with these widgets. So basics on rendering UI in the chat. Widgets are always triggered by an MCP tool response. They are rendered within an iframe, which is actually a double iframe situation because the app itself is also in its own sandbox. There can be multiple layout options, so we can have picture-in-picture, we can have full screen mode, and to keep in mind, you might want to keep in mind, these are heavily cached assets, so we do from time to time have some latency issues, but that is improving. Tool descriptions reference the widget that should be used, that should be rendered, and then the resource actually holds the widget HTML. So in other words, the tool call produces two effects. It's going to render the widget and then populate it with response data. On the other side, we have my computer is really old and I'm getting a new one. So there's a little bit of latency there. Come on, you can do it, I promise. I could say, there we go. So the widget also then has access to different properties. Some of these are user properties. So we have the user theme, where the user is located. If you have a multi-language app, we have layout properties. So what is the maximum height, et cetera, et cetera. And then we have state properties, which is actually connected to the tool output, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. But we have different ways of interacting with the host. We then have a set of methods to be able to interact with the outside world. There we go. And with the model, so you can actually have widgets making additional tool calls. So this comes with a certain set of primitives and of ways in which the widgets can interact with the model and with its environment. So basically, if we look at the architecture of an MCP app or a ChatGPT app, and by the way, I do kind of use these terms interchangeably right now, because in large part, OpenAI was kind of first to be to release this, with MCP apps coming a little bit later. But since then, the two standards have kind of converged, and the apps extension on MCP is very much inspired by what the work OpenAI did, and there's been a lot of cooperation between the different players in the industry. So these are converging, and that's why I'm using these interchangeably. So if we look at the architecture of an app, we have kind of this new paradigm that's come into place. We used to have a user that interacted with an LLM, that then that LLM or that host app could interact with an MCP server behind the scenes to call tools, to take action, et cetera, et cetera. Now we have this kind of third component coming in that is the widget, and this creates a second surface for the user to interact with. We're not only interacting with the model, but we're also interacting with UI that is coming from the MCP server. And this is kind of where we see a lot of kind of the design complexity coming in, is with that dual surface interface. It presents a lot of cool opportunities. I'm going to talk a lot about like the travel space, because we've built a lot of apps in that, but there are tons of things that you can actually do with that, and I encourage you to play around. This dual surface interface, you don't need any more manual filtering, any clicking through filters. You just express intent. You can auto form fill based on content uploads, which is something that we did for a phone buyback workflow for one of our customers. And you can also actually do some really cool games with playing against or with the LLM. So a lot of these kind of opportunities is, there are a lot of things that you can do with ChatGPT apps and MCP apps that are outside of the apps that you actually see on the App Store today. That's a very small subset of what you can actually do with it. However, this presents also design challenges, and these are just two examples that I wanted to give to you tonight, to kind of illustrate one of the reasons that we created SkyBridge. The first design challenge is complementarity. How do I ensure that the model and the widget are not repeating information, that they're giving complementary information? And then the second is, how do I keep them synchronized? How do I know when the user is navigating on some sort of widget, and how does the model actually know that that's happening and get that feedback and can react to these changes that are going on around it? In the first design consideration, what we have is ChatGPT is going to render your widget using the tool result. So we render a widget with the tool result. The issue with this is, if we give both the model and the widget the same tool result, the same information to render, what we're going to have, and this is the example of our Pokemon app, we're going to have duplicate information. So here's just a quick example of how the model just repeats exactly what is in the widget. And so this is not a great user experience, obviously. And the way in which that we can avoid that is built into MCP. Basically, we can avoid that by giving the widget a detailed meta description of what it needs to render, and then only use the tool output content to inform the model of what is being rendered. So we're really putting a lot of information in the meta, including the detailed information for navigation and what you can do with it down the line, and then being very concise in your content. And so this is just a way to illustrate kind of how this schema can work and how we can give and decide what information we're actually giving the model, because we don't need to give the model everything. And this is especially useful, obviously in this example, but also if we have a game where the model has to guess something, if we have any sort of information asymmetry that we want to kind of persist afterwards. The second design challenge is that the UI and the model must be synchronized. And to do that, I like to take the example of the Zillow app, which is an app that's live on the ChatGPT App Store. For instance, if I ask for a 2-bedroom apartment in San Francisco that's near a dog park, the user interface has to actually understand once I'm clicking through all of these different options, which option I'm actually clicking on. And the problem is, it doesn't necessarily, the model doesn't by default have knowledge of what's currently displayed on my screen. And to do that, to synchronize this, what we can do is use the navigate function from our React router plus OpenAI's set widget state to persist the location of the user and give context to the model of what the person is actually looking at. And that's important if there's a follow-up question, if you'd like more information about said two-bedroom apartment in San Francisco, and to keep all of those things synchronized so that there's not these gaps. The other, and I guess more complex, and something that we see all the time, is there are certain interactions that require a new tool call that can also be surfaced in the UI. So if I ask, for example, for a 3-bedroom apartment in Seattle near a cat cafe, well, the filters that the model has used to surface and that the MCP server has used to surface the information on my screen are not sufficient for my next. I can't navigate to that and find the information I'm looking for. So there are two basic options for me then. I can, as is in this app, the model can tell me, well, just ask me a new question and I will render a new widget and we will start this process over again. That's obviously a bit suboptimal from a UX perspective. Or that can happen directly within the UI. And that's what we're looking at now. When that does happen directly within the UI, the widget itself can trigger a tool call. And the response is going to fan out into these 3 layers where we're going to hydrate the local UI state, update the model's context, and then trigger a nudge, a follow-up message so that the model can actually react. And why do I give all of these examples? I think, some of these might look obvious from just kind of talking about them now. But when we see these patterns over and over again, we kept encountering these. We kept seeing that, these little things were taking up a lot of time to rewrite code and rewire these components each time. And that's why we packaged them together into our open source framework, which is Skybridge. The other really driving force behind this was because when the Apps SDK was released originally, it was more of an example repo than it was a full-fledged SDK. And so we had no kind of live reload. And we had one of the issues is that widgets are pre-built static files. So every single change required a full rebuild and a server restart before we can actually ever see this in ChatGPT. So we really wanted to improve both the developer experience and just make it easier and having less boilerplate code to write. So we packaged convenient React hooks to implement these and many other design patterns that make the low-level APIs easier to use. We provide a declarative way for widgets to expose additional context to the model via the data LLM attribute, which really eliminates the need to wire these components manually and treats kind of state and context as a unified concern. We have end-to-end type safety with autocomplete everywhere. And we have a full development environment with hot module reload, debug traces, and local dev tools, which I will show you in just a minute. And the really nice thing is that you can write once and run everywhere. And so you can ship for ChatGPT and all of the MCP-compatible clients, which we need actually today to add a cursor to that one as well. I forgot to add. Just released MCP Apps support. And is 100% coding agent compatible. So we also published a skill recently for you if you want to go from idea to app really quickly and kind of take you through all of the different steps as well, going through the design decisions of building an app. We have the Skybridge CLI for agentic feedback loop and CLI and MCP for instant deploy on Alpic. So let me see if I can share just really quickly what this looks like. With our dev tools, and then I will let you grab more pizza and drinks. So I have, if you have a look at our documentation, we have a set of sample apps for you, and some different showcases of the different capabilities that we've developed and we've seen, and we've seen over our different app development journey. There will be a lot of more of these soon. And I wanted to show you as well the dev tools that we have. So I did a simple app based on our e-commerce carousel sample app. And just to show you a little bit like what this looks like, if you've ever used the MCP Inspector or MCP Jam, this probably looks familiar. It's a little bit, it's very much based on that. So these MCP, this dev tool, this is not a separate application. This is built directly into SkyBridge. You don't have to install anything else. And basically what you're doing when you're using this is, you can iterate really, really quickly. You can look at the tools that you have in your e-commerce app, for example. If I call a tool and I want to look at my jewelry category. So what we see here is basically the tool call that was made. We can then look at the different properties of the widgets that have been rendered on the screen. We have our widgets in a carousel format. We can look at their display mode. We can switch on and off the theme. If we have a theme, dark and light mode, we can look at how our different languages are behaving. If we have a multi-language app, and all of the different properties that are possible within your widgets. We also have this famous widget state, which is what we're using to keep the context in sync. And so as you can see, if I add one of these or one or two of these lovely items to my card, I can see that the model context has been actually updated with those two items. And I have my logs from the MCP client showing that as well. So there are several ways to get started. And yeah, give us a star if you like the repo. And yeah, if you want to talk about, I will let you go because I know it's really late and we've been about an hour and 40 minutes already. So if you have questions, you can come up to me at the end. And yeah, thank you so much for coming tonight, and I hope you enjoyed it.